Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us for the Advances in Drug Discovery and Development 2023. My name is George Hammond, Conference Producer for Technology Networks, and I'm excited to be here to introduce our next Ask Me Anything session. As the name suggests, this session provides you with the unique opportunity to ask our distinguished guests anything on the latest in biopharmaceutical commerce. Before we begin, I would like to highlight a few important details. Firstly, this is a live session, and we are thrilled to have so many participants joining us today. Many of you have already submitted your questions when you registered, and we really appreciate your support and interest in this session. However, don't worry if you haven't submitted your questions yet. There's still time, as you can add your questions during this live session. Simply enter your question into the box on the right-hand side of your screen and click send. Whilst you are listening in, be sure to explore the literature section that you'll see on the platform too, where you can find some fantastic resources available to download for free from today's sponsors. If you come into any technical issues throughout the webinar, just click on the chat icon in the bottom right corner of your screen and our team will be sure to help you out. And without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our panel of experts from Clarivate: Mike Ward, Global Head of Thought Leadership, and Matthew Arnold, Principal Analyst.
Yes, thanks very much, George, and thank you very much for Technology Networks for giving us this opportunity. As George says, my name's Mike Ward. I'm the Global Head of Life Sciences and Healthcare Thought Leadership at Clarivate. But as a journalist and an analyst, I've been commentating on the biotech, the biopharma industry for the past 40 years. So you'll kind of appreciate that I was almost there at the Big Bang, and very, very happy to introduce some of the thoughts we have about the sort of the current biotech landscape. And I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague, Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt Arnold. I am Principal Analyst and Content Strategist at Clarivate. I have the great fortune to work with Mike here. I haven't been at it quite as long as he has, but like Mike, I'm a recovering journalist. Covered the industry for many, many years, and I've seen it transition a few ways. And we're here in part today because we at Clarivate produce an annual report on deal making, drawing on our Cortellis Deals Intelligence and our BioWorld data. So we've recently published that. We also just did a panel webinar that was great. I'll add some links into the chat later on that. And so we've really been talking to pharma and biotech folks who are active in deal making about how they see the market environment and their plans going forward.
Yeah. So one of the things that we thought we'd do is we'd sort of share with you, firstly, our perspective of what that landscape looks like. Sort of, and going back a few years as well, not just sort of looking about exactly what's happening today, because I think we have to put it in perspective. It can be clearly said that the life sciences sector had a good pandemic. Not only was it able to mobilize its resources and dismantle the barriers that had sometimes prevented companies from actually working, cooperating with each other, but they were able to actually do that in a way that was able to deliver in record time products that were able to contain the ravages of the COVID-19 pandemic. And for many investors, and this is like crucial, for many investors, the life sciences sector it became the ultimate sort of safe haven for their investment dollars, and also equally important, the public perception of the life sciences industry and the value that it was able to deliver had probably never been higher. So consequently, in 2020 and 2021, the life sciences sector saw unprecedented levels of both investment and deal making. However, one of the things that we've observed, however, it's a big however, since the start of 2020, the life sciences sector has had a more challenging time. Much of this is down to macroeconomic and political headwinds, which Matt will be able to sort of explore a little further. But the industry you know, has, we've seen some struggles in terms of sort of financing and bench and deal making. However, rather than sort of like turning at the table as Doctor Doom, I think that there are still plenty of reasons for us to be optimistic, especially when it comes to the future of the biotech sector, because if we sort of think about it, the financing challenge that the biotech sector faces at the moment needs to be put in perspective. In 2020 and 2021, we saw record sums of money being put to work in the life sciences sector. However, according to BioWorld, which is a Clarivate news service, the sums raised this year are slightly higher than they were in 2022, where we saw a drop off, and are sort of along the lines of what we saw in 2019. The challenge, though, is that what happened because of the money that was put into the sector in 2020 and 2021, we saw companies having plans to be much more ambitious in terms of actually what they thought they were going to be able to do in terms of like the number of programs they were able to run, and also whether in fact they could actually transition from being research businesses into commercial companies. So that's sort of a broad outline, and I can go into details of exactly what's happening. But Matt, any sort of thoughts that you have on that?
I mean, I think what we see is that it's less of a disastrous, catastrophic crash than a reversion to form. But it's not going to feel that way for biotechs who are struggling to bring their products to market right now in this environment. I think one of the things that really surprised us when we did the deals report is, typically when you see the pendulum swing back in favor of pharma, you'll see an increase in M&A activity. We did not see that this year in terms of volume, certainly, but in terms of value, it was a very strong year. So the value of these deals was the second highest we've seen in recent years, in the last 10 years, I believe. Why is that, Mike? Why are we seeing these big deals but far fewer?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of interesting, and you're right to sort of say that in the past, when there was these sort of like downturns in financings, we saw a sort of a dash to buy a partner, because there was that beautiful symbiosis between sort of biotech companies and pharma companies. The pharma companies resource rich, but sort of research potentially poor. Their pipelines weren't that great. Whereas the biotechs, they were the mirror opposite in terms of plenty of research, but not enough resources. So therefore there was that sort of the relationship. And I think what actually happened two things. One is because companies did have more money, and there was this sense of you could only be a real success as a biotech company if you actually transition yourself into a commercial operation. So I think that for a little while there was that belief, and we saw biotech companies coming to the sort of the partnering table and actually sort of wanting what are called co-co deals, co-commercialization, co-development. That sort of or looking for that kind of thing, and that has changed. Okay, that has certainly changed. I mean, sort of, you mentioned the sort of the deals webinar that we ran a couple of weeks ago. We had Sasha Huilov from Takeda, and she was sort of saying, look, when biotechs and pharma are looking for win-win, clearly, the sort of the issue when it really comes, what success in a deal looks like for a biotech really is, are you able to sort of get the best out of your assets, and that doesn't necessarily always mean you actually have to be the person commercializing it. So I think what we're sort of seeing is we're seeing a sort of retraction back into the way that things were before. But for the pharma companies, the whole drive for partnering, etc., hasn't changed. Interestingly, what we, if one looks at, say, for example, the state of pharma pipelines, it's quite clear why there has to be this symbiosis between the biotechs.
So many of them are standing on the edge of enormous patent cliffs, right?
Well, there's that. So of course they've got that loss of exclusivity. It means loss of revenues. For example, Humira, right? AbbVie's sort of blockbuster, $20.16 billion in 2022. Okay, so sort of peaking at about that. The patent goes, the sort of a key US patent goes off at the beginning of the year. It's projected that global revenues for Humira this year are going to be about $13 billion, $14 billion. So you can sort of see that's a huge revenues hole that AbbVie needs to fill. So you can sort of see why AbbVie's been out there sort of scouting for products. But they're not the only ones. I mean, if you look at the pipelines, firstly, the sort of the percentage of new drug approvals sponsored by those top pharma companies, that they created themselves, is very, very low, and it's getting low. And in fact, for some companies, for example, for Takeda, for Johnson & Johnson, for Sanofi, it's actually 0% of the products that they've actually put to the regulators, actually they create themselves. And even for companies like AstraZeneca, which more recently has had this sort of the accolades of being sort of very, very productive in its research and development, still only 25% of the products that it's had approved, it actually initially created and developed. And it's a similar story at Bristol Myers Squibb and AbbVie. And then when you actually look at, well, we go back to, you were talking about that sort of their portfolio. If you look at the top 5 selling drugs for all those companies, it's very, very fascinating. Only Novo Nordisk, right, in that top tier of pharmaceutical companies, can actually sort of say, hey, all our 5 best-selling drugs, we actually invented ourselves. Right. And yet the opposite of that, we come back to Bristol Myers Squibb, right? All of its top 5 best-selling drugs, that's Eliquis, that's Revlimid, Opdivo, Pomalyst, Orencia, which account for 81% of that company's revenues, were either in-licensed or were they got through acquisitions. And again,
so increasingly you're looking at this sort of bifurcated industry where biotechs are the innovation engine and pharmas are doing the commercialization and taking it that long last mile.
But it is a symbiosis. So I mean, for example, when one looks at, say, for example, I was going to call it the Innovation Reduction Act, but no, the Inflation Reduction Act,
as many have.
Yes. So if you look at the Inflation Reduction Act, one of the interesting things of sort of the politicians are basically sort of saying, oh, well, we know that all this invention actually take place somewhere else. It doesn't take place in pharma. So therefore they feel it's okay to, put the spotlight and effectively sort of, twist the thumb screws on the pharmaceutical industry. But there is that symbiosis. There has to be the pharmaceutical companies are the people who commercially develop those products and then market them. And it's because of that, that therefore able to then reward the sort of the biotech companies or the universities who actually were the original creators, and that then provides a benefit to the investors who actually initially funded that. You can't have generic drugs if you haven't had the innovative drugs in the first place. But
Right.
obviously that there's that deal, that covenant of you get that exclusivity for X amount of years, but after that exclusivity expires, then you hand over the recipe and everybody else can then potentially make it. And then there's the opportunity for seeing less expensive drugs. But I shouldn't really talk about the Inflation Reduction Act because that's in your bailiwick. So
I know it's our fault. It's
so I mean, from your perspective, and you're closer to it than I am.
Mm-hmm.
What are the
Just
issues
in a cellar
around
right away,
it?
Mike?
Huh?
Just in a cellar right away, Mike. It's a train, but I mean, I think we've done a little digging into this, and of course everything's hypothetical at this stage. But our analysts say, number one, it's really going to force a rethink on which indications and portfolios pharma decide to prioritize. And this land and expand tactic that they've pursued to build these enormous portfolios is going to be less attractive, and that could hurt a number of things. Orphan drug innovation. There's a disincentive to small molecules because you only get 9 years of being safe from the price negotiations versus 13 for biologics. So that may mean that pharmas invest more in large molecule, and I think you maybe saw that with Pfizer and Seagen, that enormous deal. Although that's a trend that's been ongoing for some time, so it's hard to say if this is really the spur. But that could impact a number of categories like cardiology and neurology, where you have a lot of small molecule, and concerningly, that's many of the diseases of aging that actually Congress and the administration seem to be really focused on with this legislation. And it could mean higher costs for administration as well, because when you're talking about large molecules, there's a lot less self-administration involved, and with less self-administration, you're looking at more non-adherence. So those are the downsides. The upsides are clearly for patients, curbs on price inflation through the rebating system. They're gonna see less drastic price rises year over year, less of these 10-15% price rises. But it's potentially going to hurt innovation. I don't think I don't think the story's in on that yet, and that could be a downside for patients and for clinicians as well.
But I mean,
and that all makes efficiency more critical, right?
Yeah, but I mean, you do sort of say it's sort of but there are those unintended consequences of it, because we actually have seen some companies decide to take programs off the table because,
or so they say,
there's a conflict of interest as far there's a moral hazard of if they pursue it, and when the Orphan Drug Act was initially created, I mean, we have to remember there was hardly nobody was creating molecules or drugs for those particular those diseases, because there wasn't a market. So therefore, there was a market failure. The Orphan Drug Act, which was first initiated sort of in the sort of the early to mid 1980s in the US, and then that model was then actually copied elsewhere around the world. We've seen hundreds of medicines now being available to patients that weren't there before, and there is a horrible danger that we might go backwards. I'm sure that as soon as they sort of start seeing the sort of the rollout of the potential consequences, there might be some sort of revision of the thoughts. But
one hopes. I mean, our Congress can't agree on funding government right now, so we'll see where it's at in a few months.
Yeah.
But
but as you mentioned, so when we're looking at the sort of the bio partnerships that are taking place, where they are down this year, right? And that is interesting. And M&A is down, and we expected, you've got the big pharma are sitting on huge amounts of money, so therefore they could put that to work. But there are reasons why they're not doing that. For example, the FTC has been sort of. I mean, you mentioned Seagen, the Pfizer Seagen deal, the Horizon Amgen deal also was under the spotlight. Can you sort of share with us first what is the FTC actually doing, and is it just picking on the pharmaceutical industry?
Oh no, and I'll start with we're in a Democratic administration, and Democrats are typically much more aggressive on antitrust than the Republicans. So I don't think this is any kind of a surprise. If healthcare companies are feeling picked on, just look to Google and Amazon, who are currently in court. And those kinds of actions are really unprecedented since the Clinton administration, I think, when you had the government take on Microsoft. So really, I think healthcare is something that the FTC is clearly looking closely at. I suspect we'll see more action on the hospital consolidation side. But there was the Amgen Horizon case where they ultimately settled and said you can go through with the acquisition, but we're going to have limitations on bundling and rebating, right? Yeah. So it might not be catastrophic, but there is going to be industry is going to be under much more of a lens. I think particularly on the health system side, but clearly they are also looking at pharma and looking at potential monopolies in these acquisitions.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you sort of say about that there was a deal, because it was one of those situations where both sides was claiming a victory, and so when I kind of looked at it, I just sort of thought, well, yeah, one sort of saying yes, there's not going to be the bundling, but then on the other hand, there was never any precedent by Amgen or any suggestion by Amgen that they're actually going to do that in the first place. So it was kind of a win-win, because actually it almost looked like there wasn't really a dispute, and I kind of wonder how much of it was just grandstanding, by the politicians of, hey, let's have a look at these things. But if we look, if we look at the sort of the biopharma deal landscape, I mean, it's kind of interesting because again, although we've seen it sort of like drop down, it's still been sort of fairly robust. And as you mentioned, that we've sort of seen that actually some of the deal values have actually been maintained.
Right.
And I kind of pointed out that, well, hey, why the reasons why people are doing this. Interestingly, the most active of the sort of the deal makers is MSD, or well, the rest of the world calls it MSD. In the States, you call it Merck and Co.
American Merck,
yeah. So those they've basically, since the start of just 2022. Okay, so since this, what I'm calling sort of this little sort of like downturn blip, they've concluded 26 deals, potentially deploying $25.1 billion if all milestones are achieved. Okay, and it's worth remembering that when you sort of see these big grandstand valuations, that is normally because the deal might involve 5, 6, 10 programs, all
Right.
with their own little milestones. And we know in the development of, the sort of the attrition, etc., that they're not all going to be successful.
They're not going to hit all those milestones.
So when you see a $5 billion, $10 billion deal, there's a good chance it's going to like shrink back to sort of a more manageable number.
Or something.
But nevertheless, Merck is clearly out there. 26 deals in sort of 18 months, 20 months or whatever it's been. That's a pretty sort of an active amount of work.
And Merck, if you go back 15 years, Merck was the poster company for in-house innovation, right? That was their their brand. We cook it all in-house, but this is the way the industry is going. Yeah.
But now you look at their top 3 selling drugs, and I think again it's one of these things where they're all from external sources. Keytruda being the poster child, because they got that. I think it was originally developed by Organon, which is a Dutch company that was acquired by Schering-Plough, and then in 2008, 2009, Merck then acquired Schering-Plough. Nobody thought Keytruda was the big deal. So when they're all doing all those acquisitions and whatever, it wasn't actually factored in the valuations, which is, again, it's kind of like that is an unintended consequence. It's a nice Christmas present for them to have, because it's going to that is what we're actually now sort of seeing pharmaceutical companies really looking for, which is a pipeline in a drug where you've got multiple options. AbbVie's Humira, again, which was developed somewhere else in a biotech company originally, again, is one of those where it has multiple indications and therefore multiple sales. But other companies, Sanofi, which is one of those that I sort of said, hey, nothing's came out of their own research. They've been very, very active. 17 deals. Again, 24.9 billion. Interestingly, they're one of those companies that is splurging quite a lot on artificial intelligence, machine learning. Rather than trying to build up its own internal capability, is actually doing deals with other people. And then, of course, we're also looking at, and then
we just did a report on AI and machine learning companies, sort of some of the emerging AI and machine learning companies, actually. That's on our website.
Well, it's clear that AI and ML is going to be one of those enabling technologies across the whole of the waterfront for biopharma development, whether it's from the original sort of discovery, target identification, through sort of clinical trials. Where is the how to optimize those clinical trials, through the sort of the regulatory process, and then actually into sort of commercialization. So it's clear that we've got all these sort of little companies who all sort of focusing on sort of different sort of niches in that space. And as you sort of say, we've just produced a report which actually identified companies that we think are probably not on everybody's radar. So we're not talking about the likes of In Silico Medicine or Exscientia or whatever, who are actually doing the big deals, but actually people who are the next generation of technologies. And in fact, while we're seeing a lot of these companies are looking for assets, and obviously the Holy Grail is always a sort of almost a market ready asset, but they're few and far between. We're actually sort of seeing, therefore, that the pharma companies are having to go further upstream into those of early stage opportunities.
So more preclinical assets and early stage platforms,
and those valuations have been maintained. What is interesting is the efforts, again, back to those sort of platform technologies. So things like AI, ML, cell and gene therapy, RNA technologies, antibody drug conjugates, which bispecific antibodies, gene editing, right? These are all technologies that are very much almost the wheelhouse of biotechs. They're at cutting edge technology. I mean, gene editing, the seminal paper by sort of the Doudna and Charpentier was only published in 2012, and they got the Nobel Prize in 2020, and
right.
we might see the first product that's based on that gene editing technology actually get approved by the FDA later this year. So you can sort of see that these are, and there are a bunch of biotech companies who are all pursuing that sort of gene editing, and we're now seeing pharma companies, getting on board with that. The Seagen deal, that's all about accessing antibody drug conjugates, and Seagen, formerly known as Seattle Genetics, is one of the sort of the powerhouses in that space. So it's when you sort of see the valuation that's associated with that deal, it's not necessarily surprising, and we can sort of see that there is a commercial concept for these technologies. We're seeing products, I mean, if one looks at what the FDA is now approving, we're seeing antibody drug conjugates, we're seeing bispecific antibodies, we're seeing cell and gene therapy, and so at the moment we're putting together the drugs to watch for 2024, and our analysts are coming up with
this is an annual report that we do as well, looking at what drugs are likely to achieve a blockbuster status within 5 years, or are going to be paradigmatically revolutionary for patient care, or both.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing. But these are the ones that are now really coming to the fore. So it's a sort of an interesting space. And then we come to M&A. Well, there again, as you mentioned, sort of I think that we've sort of had a hiatus with M&A, partly because
biotechs had the upper hand, right?
They didn't necessarily want to sell, right? Or the valuations were high, but we've sort of seen a sort of massive decline. I mean, during 2022, the Nasdaq Biotech Index dropped 22% from its heights.
Right.
And this year it's kind of been stable, but it's still slightly lower. We're way off where we were in 2021. So the assets now are probably getting a little bit more in the sort of, we might be able to afford this. But actually what we're sort of seeing is that, two things. One, because of the FTC, I think the pharma companies have sort of said, hang on, is this what we want to do? And secondly, what we're also sort of hearing is that these big deals take a lot to digest. I mean, if they can be sort of like super lucrative, but they are hard to digest, and therefore the sort of the bolt-on deals is sort of technically what we've been seeing. But sort of
we never talk about the cost of incorporating a whole other company into your company, and how much that gums up the works. But it's extraordinary.
But on the other hand, it can be transformational. I mean, you look again, sort of someone like AstraZeneca, when they acquired MedImmune. I mean, MedImmune now is the sort of the research engine for AstraZeneca. Okay, it's sort of, I mean, they paid a lot of money for it, but you now look at the pipeline, you can sort of see, wow, it's that is something that worked. Similarly, Roche with Genentech. Genentech is essentially the sort of the R&D engine for Roche. So sometimes it works, and at other times it's like, okay, we're going to get into a particular space. So we've seen it where companies have decided they want to get into rare diseases, which was a completely different business model from the sort of these pharmaceutical guys. They just go and acquire people who are already successful. So we saw Takeda buying Shire recently. Before that, we saw Sanofi acquiring Genzyme. So it's kind of interesting. Sort of the big deals we've seen recently. I mean, you mentioned Horizon and Amgen. You mentioned Seagen, Pfizer. I mean, that's, again, these have still got to be completely settled. But one that has been settled is that AstraZeneca Alexion deal, which was a pretty big deal. but most of the deals we're seeing are much smaller and much more discreet.
So it's the case that pharmas still have to access these technologies to begin filling their holes from loss of exclusivity.
Innovation.
And they don't have a choice.
Yeah, the sort of that quest for innovation, is there. Okay, it doesn't mean that pharma is, the big pharma is still going to do, innovation, but the biotechs are the companies who are able to do that, and the sort of the areas they're looking for is products, medicines that are going to make a genuine difference. So it has to be innovative. The days of the Me Too are long gone, and but what's required for and talking to the sort of pharmaceutical executives is that they want quality data, and it can be early data, but it has to be robust. It has to be quality. And interestingly, talking to them, sometimes the first conversations they have with a biotech who's got an interesting idea, the answer is not yes, it's not no, it's not yet. It's come back and see us. And there are examples of where, in fact, that is precisely what has happened. I mean,
so pharmas are being more strategic and careful about jumping into these investments right now, probably because of, as you said, the FTC, the unsteady economic environment. They're being a little more choosy.
Yeah. So so that's sort of essentially I think that where we're at. It's we've seen lots and lots of cycles within the biotech space, and one of the things that having covered it for decades, right, is that I'm amazed at how adaptable the sort of the biotech industry, how resilient it's been. So each time it's hit these road bumps, but what tends to happen is that the quality companies, the quality science always shines through and comes through. It might be in a different form. I mean, for example, the original creators of Humira, Cambridge Antibody Technology, it kind of got caught in that no man's land in terms of sort of investments, etc., and was it was acquired by AstraZeneca when AstraZeneca realizes they wanted access to antibody technology. That's what people were buying years ago, right? So that was the platform, and you can sort of see that how successful that's been. But this company, it was acquired for 400 million. Okay, 400 million was 1 week's revenues for Humira.
Right.
Okay, so it's just
not a great deal in retrospect for Cambridge Antibody, but
they didn't own all the rights, but nevertheless, you can sort of see that some. And this is a sort of a crucial deal of when when companies do deals, right? Biotech companies do deals with pharmaceutical companies. The challenge for executives is to ensure that they get the best deal possible, right? They don't want to over egg the pudding and sort of say, hey, we want $100 billion for this, but they have to ensure that they don't sell themselves short either. So there is one of these things where sort of we've seen it in the past where assets have ended up becoming sort of superstar products, and therefore it's almost beholden on biotech executives to ensure that they have all the sort of like the data that they need at their hand, that the pharmaceutical companies have got in that negotiation, sort of like really having a firm grip, a realistic grip on what the addressable market is. So you're understanding what the competitive landscape is, what the potential is, the epidemiology, the demographics, etc.
How
And
differentiated this product potentially is from competitors.
and also understand, for example, what the payers are going to think about this.
Mm-hmm.
So although the biotech executive might sort of say, hey, and we're going to go back to this model of I'm only going to go to phase 2 with this phase 2 concept, and then my idea is I'm then going to license it out or pass it on, actually sell it to a pharmaceutical company. You still got to have an idea of what that commercial runway looks like going forward, to ensure that you're actually sort of negotiating a firm price on the product. That's just a little bugbear of mine. In all conversations I've had with biotech executives.
What does an attractive company look like to pharma? How does a biotech make themselves attractive to pharma, or can they? Is it just
okay? So one of the things is that if you've ever been to any of these biopartnering meetings, it's clear it's a relationship industry.
And you hear that from both pharma and biotech.
Yeah, and as I sort of say, this idea about not yet. The idea is actually one to identify internal champions for potentially your cause. To be honest, okay, because trust is a huge currency for deal making, etc. And it's often when I've sort of spoken to the biotech to the pharma execs, so well, how did it work out? Sometimes it's actually come from their own scientists having spotted something at for example, a science meeting, where they sort of go, oh, that actually might answer the challenge that we're facing, or they might be sort of addressing something that we should be thinking about. And it's very much so to make themselves attractive is being visible, but being honest with what they're able to do and what they're not able to do. Because one of the important things to remember about some of these partnering deals is the resource that the pharma company can bring to the table isn't just about money. It's also about expertise. And there's a lot that sort of the biotech companies can actually learn, because of course it's in both sides' interests to make the asset the best it can be.
Right. Looking at some of the questions that are coming in, we have one that says, how easy is it to find a consensus on valuations? What can biotech execs do to ensure that they are not going into the negotiation naked when it comes to key data that will help inform the valuation process?
Yeah, so I kind of sort of referred to that.
So you were hinting at that, yeah.
Yeah, so in terms of there is always going to be a potential tension, but it's not necessarily that isn't the deal breaker that I've tended to find. It's more in terms of actually, can we work with each other, right? Is that really the sort of the key? But on that sort of the valuation, it's literally understanding the real potential of your molecule and having a realistic expectation of that, and also understanding that there's still a huge amount of risk associated with the product. I mean, that's sort of the classic of this sort of the attrition rate, that sort of phase 2, still something like 30% are going to not make it to the market. And don't forget, all those who actually get approved still don't necessarily ever return the money that was invested in them in the first place. So it's a very, very small proportion of companies that actually sort of like deliver the sort of huge returns, which is why it's a bit like sort of like, you know, the sort of the politicians' survivor bias. They look at the successful drugs that are making, you know, sort of huge amounts of money, and then go, oh, right, and they forget about all the ones that, you know, sort of, are lying on the battlefield.
That farmers plowed money into, and
yeah, and it's sort of, so it's a sort of a classic, as I say, it's a classic case of survivor bias there. But yeah, so as I say, the best thing to do is, you know, just ensure that you have a full understanding of the market landscape, the commercial landscape in that space, and also actually know sometimes, you know, sort of look at what patents are getting filed, and what the highly cited research papers are saying, because you could quite easily be innovated out of existence. There have been examples, right? For example, those hepatitis C drugs, where, you know, within a year they were overtaken by the next one, which was then overtaken by the next one, and then of course they were then so successful they actually almost like killed their market anyway. But you can sort of see how quickly it is to potentially overtake. So again, having a sort of an idea of what's coming down the pipe is also important.
I guess just to conclude, I would add, for biotech friends, don't give up. There's still, we see in these data that they're clearly still pharma's on the hunt. They may be selective. It may take you a few meetings to establish the trust and the chemistry to move forward, but it's possible, and it's happening.
Thank you so much, Mike and Matthew. I'm sure the audience will agree when I say that was a really fantastic discussion, and we are incredibly appreciative of your time today. Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for this session today. However, any questions that we didn't have time to get to will be sent to the panelists after the event to address via email. And this talk, along with all the other talks in the event, will now be available to view whenever you want for the next 30 days. And you can continue to submit your questions whilst watching on demand, and these will be answered offline. And that just leaves me to say thank you once again to our panelists, Mike and Matthew, and we'll be back soon with the next talk.
Thank you.
Thanks, George. Great to be here.